Hello, how you all doing? I apologize for the radio silence over the last few weeks. I've been focusing on my real research and not my YouTube research. So I apologize. Please bear with me. It's been pretty crazy. So something I wanted to talk about in today's video was something that I've seen popping up a bit on Twitter lately and a bit on YouTube with some bloggers and whatnot. And it's this statement here. Erg mode seems like a good way to perform less effective HIIT. Now, you'll notice my comment down here. I'm yet to see any more evidence than a few YouTube bloggers to support this. How ironic that a YouTube blogger is talking to you about YouTube bloggers, hey? Jason was kind enough to lob a bit of research on me. We'll get to that in a minute. So first things first, let's just define erg mode. I think we all know what it is, so I'll be quick. When we're on our ergo trainer, we chuck it in erg mode. It doesn't let us put out any more power than what's prescribed. So if we're using a program like a structured training in Zwift or Trainer Road, and it says chuck out 200 watts for 10 minutes, you just turn your brain off and you just do it. You don't have to think about it. Personally, I love it. From a physiological context, well, we're going to talk about that today. So let's just get into what the research says. And today we're going to skim over 3 studies pretty quickly. Okay, so physiological and psychological responses to outdoor versus lab cycling. Now, this is a 2014 study. So this was the same year that Zwift was conceived. At least that's what Google's telling me. So what do they do here? They send a cohort of riders out to do a 40-kilometer TT out in the wild, and they chucked out about 200 watts. Then they brought them inside. They chucked them on some CompuTrainers, which are the kind of OG ergo trainer for the current smart training environment that we exist in. And their power was about 25, 30 watts down. Now, basically what they reported here was that the rate of perceived exertion was the same, even though the power was less. Now, we're probably getting into some semantics here, and if GP Lama decides to watch this video, he's probably going to be triggered by a lot of things I say. So Shane, feel free to call me out in the comments as much as you want. I think we have all gone out and done a bunch of hill reps and then tried to replicate that on an ergo trainer and said our power is down on the ergo trainer. There must be a calibration issue between our power meter and our ergo trainer. A possible explanation to that, and that's not to discount that may be true, but a possible explanation to that is that your rate of perceived exertion will always be different between your indoors and your outdoors riding. Now, this was a study that I got lobbed at me from Jason, pacing the missing piece of the puzzle to high intensity interval training. We found the missing piece to the puzzle. Collective groan. Let's not fornicate with the spiders. You don't need to know the details for this study. Well, you do, but you don't. They did a bunch of different intervals on a couple of different occasions. They did AO, which was all out intervals. So it was just, as it says, all out. They did CC, computer controlled, which was erg mode. So they limited them to these particular, I shouldn't say they limited to them, but they had the option to decide what that power would be. And then they did athlete controlled. So basically the athlete had the opportunity to control what their power would be. Now, what the conclusion was, compared to worked, matched, even pace strategies, the use of all-out pacing strategy during high-intensity interval training provides the greatest physiological stress. Yes, okay. Possibly leading to greater adaptation. The key word there is possibly. They didn't measure much in this study other than just what the power was, and it wasn't an intervention or a longitudinal study, so they definitely can't make any inferences about what has the greater training stimulus as to the training stimulus. I apologize. Listen to me trip over my words as I always do. Now, the final study we're going to talk about today, this is an interesting one. Rollers versus trainers. Now, in a pre-CV19 world, I met Neil Henderson, who you would know as working with Sufferfest, who I'm not sure what they changed their name to. They got swallowed up by Wahoo. And he's also Rowan Dennis's coach. So Rowan being, probably one of the greatest definitely the greatest time trialists that Australia's ever produced anyway. And we had a really interesting conversation about rollers versus trainers. And he was of the opinion that it was worth investigating whether rollers had better outcomes than trainers, because he thought that his cohort that he was coaching, the guys that were good at rollers, were generally better cyclists. So it's worth investigating is what I'm getting to here. This is a 2017 study, pretty straightforward. Rollers group, trainer group, and a control group. Control group we don't really need to talk about. What was good about this was it was an 8-week intervention. I won't say too much about the intervention because it was pretty mundane. It was just 3 times a week. I think it was 8 5-minute intervals, ramping up. Something doesn't really matter. It's not something you're going to try and replicate yourself. Okay, so what did they come up with here? So pre and post intervention. The rollers group, the VO2 max, basically didn't change. But in the trainers, the VO2 max increased by about 4 or 5 points. So that was statistically significant. Now, I know I've spoken previously before about VO2 max being a particularly good marker or indicator of performance, and not something we really need to worry about too much. But when all things are equal and everything's the same, if one group increase their VO2 max and one group didn't, well, which one are you going to go train in? If the amount of rate, if the rate of perceived exertion is the same, well, of course you're going to go train in the ergo group here. Now, I'm not going to talk about the 10-kilometer TT. These TT results were recorded out in the wild, and the author reported that the wind conditions were completely different. So I don't think there's anything to go into here. Probably the only other thing I'll say about this study, it reads like it was written by a Shakespearean scholar. Participants adorned a HR monitor to visually determine and modulate, if necessary, the level of intensity to mirror the prescribed HR intensity more precisely. I'll link the study in the description below. Just go have a read. It's just absolutely comical. It's hilarious. So what are our take-home messages on this? Well, I think the first thing to come up is that when we saw on the other study about the all-out efforts being a higher power than the erg mode efforts, that might seem good in theory, but we know that fatigue resilience at the moment is probably the biggest predictor of cycling performance, race performance. So just because you can once or twice chuck out a big power, you need to be able to repeat that over 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 efforts. So that's where, and I think we've all done this. We've all gone out on our first or second hill rep for the night. We've gone crazy. We've felt good. We're dancing on the pedals. And then by the 3rd or 4th, we're done. And then by the 5th, it's like, carry me home, please. So this is where our erg mode is useful. It stops us from getting carried away, and it helps keep us locked to a prescribed power. The other thing that I'll say as well is all this is just very academic, to be honest, which is ironic because I am an academic and I'm talking to you about academic things. But the most beneficial training, and forgive me for saying this for being cliche, the most beneficial training is the training that you adhere to. It's the one that you're most consistent with. So if you're most consistent in erg mode, be consistent in erg mode. If you're most consistent mucking around on rollers, trying to have a really smooth cadence on rollers, then train on your rollers. Just do what's most consistent anyway. So anyway, look, that's my little spiel about erg mode, just a trend that I've noticed popping up on Twitter a little bit, and thought that I'd throw in my 2 cents, particularly being Southern Hemisphere. Winter is starting now, and you can probably hear that it's actually raining outside at the moment as well. So thanks for watching. I know this is cliche, but please subscribe, please hit the like button. And if you have any questions, shoot them below. Also, please, for the love of God, follow me on Twitter. The metaverse at the moment is an absolute dumpster fire. It's full of spam bots and poor organic reach. So please follow me on Twitter. In Elon we trust. Thank you, and I will see you probably in 4 to 6 weeks at this rate. Cheers, guys. Catch you later.